We are going to be ranking 35 of Minecraft's most unique biomes, ranging from the standard grassy plains all the way to the deep dark and the newly released cherry blossom forest. We've got 4 categories to sort them into: magnificent, interesting, mediocre, and dull, and they will be judged on how much content they have to offer to the player. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. To start off today's list, we have the Badlands. The Badlands are quite a rare biome in Minecraft. You don't see it very often, but when you do, it's very fun to see since it's such a change of pace compared to all the green and blue that Minecraft has to offer. But outside of, what it does offer visually, there's not much in the sense of, actual landscapes with it. Essentially, if you were to replace all of the red sand and terracotta in that biome with, grass, dirt, and stone, it would look almost identical to just any normal plains or hills biome. The only thing it does have going for it is its special mine shafts, but it's going to be going in the mediocre. Next up, we have the bamboo forest. So these really only typically spawn in or around jungle biomes, so you're not going to see a ton of these, as you don't typically see a ton of jungles, and even then, jungles don't have a 100% chance, to spawn with a bamboo variant. Typically what they offer is essentially just bamboo and pandas, but bamboo is pretty useful and pretty fun. It's just, that's about the only thing it offers compared to jungles or other biomes, so it's also actually going to be going in the mediocre tier. Next up, we have the basalt deltas, our first nether biome. So these guys are kind of interesting. I'd say that this specifically is one of the most dangerous biomes on this list, if not the most dangerous, just because of how hazardous the terrain is. In terms of actual content, it doesn't have much to offer. Typically, magma cubes will spawn here, and outside of the blackstone and basalt that it offers, there's not a whole lot, gameplay wise. There's not a whole lot you can farm from it, unless you are specifically looking for magma cubes, basalt, or blackstone. Because of that, it is also going to be going in the mediocre category. Next up, we have a beach. So these don't really offer very much in terms of unique. They're essentially just the bridge between several biomes, whether that be a desert or any kind of ocean biome. There's not a whole lot to these, and you will find like buried treasure on these, but other than that, there's not a whole lot going for them. They're more of just a transitory biome when you're going between 2 of the more unique and interesting ones. This one is going to be our first dull category one. Next up, we have the birch forest. So these guys are essentially similar to the rest of the forests in the game, or I guess our typical forests, except the main difference is that instead of oak logs or dark oak logs or spruce, you're actually going to be having birch. But as far as that goes, that's about the only change. And now I know I've put several in here already, but just because of the way this list has been laid out, this biome, the birch tree biome, is also going in the mediocre tier. Next up, we have the ocean. This is just our basic ocean biome. Now these guys have a lot to offer. A ton of different structures and naturally generated terrain can spawn here. Underwater ravines, ocean temples, ocean ruins. You can find drowned dolphins, sea turtles, all kinds of fish here as well. This one is actually going to be our first interesting category. Moving on from the ocean, we're going to go right back into hell itself. We have the Crimson Forest. Now these guys, oh boy, there's a lot to offer here. Obviously you have the crimson logs and crimson leaves. I'm not sure that's what they're called, but you guys know what I'm talking about. The leaf block on the crimson trees, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's also got hoglins, baby hoglins, and piglins to offer here. They naturally spawn. And generally speaking, just like the warped forest, this is one of the most interesting biomes in the game, so I am going to put it in the magnificent tier, our first one up there. Next up, we have the dark oak biome. So this one is actually a lot different than other forests. I think this is where Minecraft really started to actually develop on their forests and making them unique from one another. So with this, the trees are very, very widely different compared to normal trees, as well as brown and red mushrooms spawn within this forest, and most of all, or I guess probably least of all since it's so rare, woodland mansions exclusively spawn here. This is the only biome that you can find them in. And because they already have a rare percentage on top of that, that's why you never run into them. They're super, super rare in any given Minecraft world. But because it's a forest biome that actually has a lot going for it, it's going to be put in the interesting tier above the birch tree forest. Next up, we have our first biome in the end, and it's going to be the main end island where the dragon spawns. This guy, man, how many speedruns of Minecraft and completions of the game have you gone through? Now, there's not a whole lot of content that can be taken back with you, like in your inventory, but what it does offer is, basically the end boss of the game. And for that, I can't put it any lower than interesting, but outside of that end dragon fight, which, don't get me wrong, it's amazing. I wouldn't ask for anything else. It's just outside of that fight, there's not much else to the island. Next up, we have deserts. Now, deserts, well, I guess especially this picture here, they are kind of barren. There's not a whole lot to them. But what they do have is a lot of exclusive items. Cactus, dead bushes, desert temples, even those little, desert wells that are basically useless. They have them. Deserts have a lot going for it in terms of exclusivity, despite having such a barren landscape. And because of that, since we're judging based off the amount of content they give the player, it is going to be going in the interesting category. Next up, we have Dripstone Caves. So this is going to be our first cave variant biome, released in the 1.18 update, I believe, if I remember correctly. These guys are basically just filled to the brim with blocks of dripstone, as well as actual, I believe they're called pointed dripstone. But other than, the word dripstone, there's not much that these caves offer. It does add a lot of new environment to it, but it's not significant enough for me to put it in the interesting category. It is only going in the mediocre one. Next up, we have a flower forest. So the only real difference between a flower forest and other typical forests you find in the game is the fact that they have a ton of flowers. Now, I don't know off the top of my head if there are flowers that only exclusively grow in flower forests, and if that's the case, it might be bumped up a tier, but as of right now, it's just not different enough from other forests that we already have in the game to where I can't put it any higher than the dull category. Oh, I'm so sorry, Flower Forest. Up next is one of those forests I was talking about. We have the regular Oakwood Forest. This guy is going in the mediocre. It is probably the most standard of biomes that we have in the game that you typically think about when you hear the word Minecraft, and it has a decent amount of content to it. You'll find typical forest animals here, things like, sheep, cows, as well as bees. Beehives usually spawn in these biomes, so it's got a decent amount going for it. It has enough to differentiate it from birch forests and other kinds of forests, but it's just not really, super interesting. It goes right in the mediocre category. Next up, we have the Frozen Ocean. So this is honestly not too bad of a biome, if I do say so myself. You have things like packed ice and blue ice that can spawn in these, as well as things like strays, as well as polar bears and, polar bear cubs. So honestly, it's got enough to differentiate it from a normal ocean to where I'm going to put it in the interesting category. Next up, we have the Eroded Badlands. So this is very similar to the Badlands biome up here. Only main difference is the terrain. As you can see, it looks a lot more like the geography that you'd see in places like the Grand Canyon, New Mexico, Arizona type vibe. But in terms of content, it is almost identical to the Badlands. In fact, I might not even should have added this to the list, but because it's here, I'm going to be putting it in the mediocre category. Next up, we have the Ice Spikes. Now, this is a very rare biome in Minecraft. Don't get me wrong, I fully understand that. But what it does have to offer is not much different. You can find all the items in this biome elsewhere, and plentiful of it. And considering how rare it is, it's not very practical to go out searching for it. So all things considered, it is going to be our third dull biome. Next up, we have the Soul Sand Valley, our next nether biome. These guys have a decent amount to offer. They've got soul sand, as well as that other soul sand variant. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head. Basically, the soul sand variant that doesn't slow you down. And then also, what comes with every Soul Sand Valley is a lot of fossils and skeletons. Lots and lots of skeletons. But because a lot of this stuff can actually be obtained elsewhere in the game, I'm only going to be putting it in, I might even put it in dull. I might change this later, but for now, it's going to be going in dull. No, I'm actually going to put it in mediocre. You're welcome to all the Soul Sand Valley stands out there. It is not going to be going in the dull category today. Next up, we have the Jagged Peaks, which is our first mountainy biome today. These guys spawn with a lot of goats and a lot of packed snow, and those are its two main characteristics that it has to offer. But it's also just such a unique setting in Minecraft. You know, obviously they were only very recently introduced into the game, and perhaps because of that, I've got a little bit of honeymoon phase to this biome, so I'm actually going to be putting it up in the interesting category. Next up, we've got the jungle. Now this guy is jam-packed with stuff. Obviously you have a lot of exclusive things like jungle logs, jungle leaves, cocoa beans, parrots, and even things like ocelots. And I feel like I'm having the opposite effect of the jagged peaks, where the jungles have been in the game so long that none of the stuff in there is surprising. Oh, you know what? I also forgot to mention jungle temples, but jungle temples are very passable. They don't really have any loot in them. But with that all being said, I'm actually going to be putting it in the interesting category. Usually it's a good day when you stumble across a jungle. There's a lot of stuff you can find in there. Next up, we have one of our newest biomes, the mangrove swamp. Of course, it's got the new exclusive mangrove type of trees, as well as lots of mud, and overall just very swampy vibes, just like regular swamps. But it's got that added advantage to it over regular swamps, where there's a lot more content in here. There's a lot more to find, a lot more to do. So this one, just like the jungle, is going to be going in the interesting category. Next up, we have the lush caves. So this cave biome actually has a lot more going for it compared to the dripstone caves. You have things like glowberries, as well as lots of moss and drip leaves. And I believe axolotls can also spawn in drip leaf caves. And for all those factors, I think there's a lot more to offer and a lot more to do in a drip leaf cave. I'm sorry, I've been saying drip leaf cave, I mean lush cave. A lot more to do to a lush cave than dripstone. And for that fact, I'm going to be putting it in the interesting category. Man, it feels like the rest of them here are heavy hitters. I'm going to have a lot more in the top categories. But to start off with, these final 14 is actually going to be the Nether Wastes, which is going in the Dole. Since the 1.16 update, the Nether Wastes has felt like the transitory biome when getting to the other cooler biomes in the Nether. So similar to how the beaches are, this is kind of the in-between. There's not a whole lot here. The only thing that it does have exclusive to it, unlike these other biomes, is the fact that Nether Fortresses can only spawn in this biome. But even then, I feel like Nether Fortresses are kind of their own thing, if that makes sense. I don't know. Basically, Nether Wastes are very ugly, big, and there's not a whole lot to do in them other than to try and get to the other Nether biomes. Next up, we have a coral ocean here. Or I believe they're called worm oceans, yeah, something like that. Either way, the main drive and appeal of this biome is the amount of coral and tropical fish you can find here. That's basically what it's all about, and because it's only about that, it does it very, very well. You're not going to see any complaints from me about the quality of the coral reefs in these biomes. Outside of coral reefs, though, that's about all it offers from different ocean biomes, and because of that, I can't put it any higher than the mediocre tier. Next up, oh man, is this even, you know, a question? The mushroom biome, easy S tier, magnificent. The only biome in the game where you can find mushroom biomes, mycelium, and technically you can find the big mushrooms and dark oak forest, but regardless, this is still just such a unique biome and such a rare one too. And now all the way from the magnificent tier, we have the plains biome, our most standard of biomes in the entire game, right alongside the oak forest. And because of that, it's going to be going right in the mediocre tier. Actually, you know what? I just thought about it. I'm going to be putting it in the dull tier. There's not really much it has to offer on its own. Of course, it's iconic because it's been one of the longest standing biomes in the game, probably 12, 13 years at this point. But it also means that everything in this biome can be found in all of these other biomes. There's not much that it has that's unique for it. I feel like it's one of those biomes you stay in to set up your base, but not to really explore. Next up, we have the savanna biome. These guys are going to be going in the the interesting category. It's on the more unique side of our forest biomes that we have, with the savanna trees that we have, as well as, I believe, mules and donkeys can spawn in this biome, if I'm correct. If I'm wrong in that, someone will let me know and call me out for it in the comments, but I believe they can spawn in this biome, so hence why it's going in the interesting category. Next up, it's probably even hard to tell what this is on the picture, but this is the deep dark. And 100% it's going in the magnificent. I don't think I could even talk about all that it has to offer with Skulk, all the different Skulk variation of blocks, and ancient cities, the Warden, I mean, oh my gosh, there's so much that these biomes have to offer. So yes, 100% it's going in the magnificent tier. Next up we have the snowy plains, and it's essentially plains but with snow. And unfortunately, snow is just not enough to bring it up an entire tier. So it is going to be remaining in the dull category, just with it, you know, there are two plains brothers right here. Next up, we have the Shattered Savannas. Now, these guys don't typically offer anything extra that savannas have, and are also a lot rarer because of the terrain that they have. This is probably the one exception I'm going to be making on this list, and it's not even really an exception, it's just because you can't find this terrain anywhere else in the game. These guys are insane. You would travel the world looking for a biome like this to set up a base in. And for that, and only for that, it gets up to the mediocre tier and not dull. Next on the list, we have the Snowy Taiga. Now, I just mentioned that snow is simply not enough to change something from dull to mediocre or interesting, but Snowy Taiga actually has a little bit more going for it. Of course, first off, it's got a different wood type, making it, you know, just a little bit more unique, but then also foxes can spawn in this biome, and berries. So it's got a little bit more going for it than simply just adding snow. Regardless, anyways, it's going to be going in the mediocre tier. Next up, we have the Stony Peaks, so it's very similar to this biome right up here, the Jagged Peaks, but of course there's a lot less snow. I believe goats can still spawn on this biome. I'm not 100% sure, but you're not going to find very much powdered snow here. And because of that, it's a little bit less exclusive than the Snowy Peaks. It's going to be going in the mediocre tier. Next on the list, we have the Swamp. Swamp is, it's a pretty unique biome, honestly. I think it's one of Minecraft's best forests. And I know we have a lot of forests on this list, but they did a good job with this one. Obviously, it looks very distinctly unique compared to the others, and the trees it offers are just oak, but the other things it has is pretty good. Witch huts can spawn here, as well as slimes commonly spawn here, which is one of the most sought after mobs in the game for a variety of reasons, you know, leads, redstone contraptions, slime blocks, etc, etc. And for that, it is barely going to make its way into the interesting category. Oh wow, these final three are some heavy hitters. First up, we have the newly introduced Cherry Grove biome. I think I mentioned this before with some other biomes, but the honeymoon phase with a biome. Not to mention all of the other unique aspects it has to it with the cherry oaks, the cherry blossom petals, as well as they're like flowers on the ground. I'm not remembering what they're called off the top of my head, but essentially they litter the ground with these beautiful pink petals. It is going to be going up in the interesting category. And our final two will probably not surprise very many people, but Warped Forest is also going to be going up here in the magnificent tier. It's got all the same attributes as a Crimson Forest, except instead of piglins and hoglins, you have endermen, which are arguably a lot more useful than hoglins and piglins. Plus, I think the look of the blue in the nether is a little bit better than the red. And last but not least, we have the Biome End Highlands, which is also going to be going in the magnificent tier. These guys have coarse fruit as well as end cities, and that's really the main reason you go to the end. You go through the entire dragon boss fight and leave the island just to get to these outer end islands and find an end city as well as coarse fruit. But with that being said, that is my complete biome tier list. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. But either way, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm looking to continue to grow this channel, so if you're willing to join me, I'm willing to have you here for the journey. With all that being said, I will see you guys in the next one.